Okay, it looks like we are live here.
Yeah,
Are we live though, is the real question.
says we're live
Okay,
on the screen.
are we live, everyone? I hope we are, because I want to make sure you guys hear from this amazing, amazing leader, Maya Baker, who is a expert, a parenting expert, a coach, just so many amazing things. But really, what I want to get straight to the details of why I have you on here today, Maya, is because you have four beautiful children and you are a single mom. And it is amazing to see the way your kids love you and the way that you are able to have those amazing conversations that cannot be easy at times. And those conversations are about abuse, about racism, about how to be leaders. And so the world needs someone like you, Maya, to help us talk to kids and to say it in a way that doesn't bring fear to them, but just helps them feel loved for one, and it helps them know that they have the knowledge to stand up for themselves. And so with that, thank you, Maya, so much for being on today.
You're so welcome. I'm so honored to be here and to be sharing with your ladies.
Yes, I am so excited. So I would love to just hear, and I know a little bit about your background, obviously, but I would love for my audience to know a little bit more about you.
Okay. So my background is I went to college for biblical counseling, and I've been in some form of counseling for about 20 years, actually. A lot of youth counseling. And then I've done like lay counseling in the church with couples, and recently just been really diving into the parenting realm and parenting families. And so I am a biblical family life coach, and that's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing actually for like more than 20 years, but I'm actually just officially like doing it on my own. And yeah. I
love that. You said just, and I was like, it's not just.
No.
I'm doing this for a while.
My own.
Yes, I know. It makes a difference, but I love that. And you have four beautiful children. So go back even to your childhood. I want to hear a little bit about your childhood and what made you really want to be such a powerful, strong mom, not just to your own kids, but to thousands of other parents and to their kids.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of people in general that can relate to this, but I know there's a lot of women in our community, in your community, that can relate to this. That, I grew up in a home. Well, I grew up in a family life that was really chaotic, lots of abuse, like physical, sexual, mental, all of it. And really, like, I grew up in a home where we didn't really talk about our feelings. And I think that's pretty common for many people, unfortunately. Although I do think our culture is kind of taking a shift now. But, a lot of people do grow up in homes where they just don't share their feelings, and some of it's because our parents, they didn't do that either. And they didn't know how, or nobody taught them, And so I grew up in a home where there was trauma, there was big traumas, little traumas, and we just didn't talk about it, like, at all. So I grew up as an adult, and when I was 18, I had a major like moment in my life, and I became Christian, and I was like, I don't want to get trapped in all these cycles, right, that have been in my family for generations. And so I was like, I'm going to be the cycle breaker, and I'm going to break these cycles. And it is not easy, because I first had to start having those hard conversations with myself and with God, and letting other people come into my life, to counsel and heal and speak into those places and learn how to share my feelings, learn what I was feeling. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling. Yeah. We don't talk about that. And so I was so determined, just like literally since I turned 18, that when I have a family, when I have kids, I want it to be different. I want my children to know that whether they're going through like a little trauma in life or a big pain in life, that we get to talk about it. And that I wanted to create like a safe space in our family, and that these conversations get to be normalized instead of like shame-based and nobody knows what to say and it's awkward and uncomfortable, but also to be able to be okay with the awkward and uncomfortable, to be able to be okay that sometimes we go through things that are painful, and to not, to just normalize it, really, honestly, and to teach my kids how to have a healthy conversation through hard things too. So that's kind of, I mean, it's from the chaos and wanting to break the cycle that I really became so committed and was like, God, I just really want to break this cycle and do it different. And as I started doing it different, was realizing like, I've got something to share with families here, you know, and actually people realized it for me first. I'd be like, how do you talk to your kids about this? Or like, have you said this to your kids? And have you had this conversation? And how did you do it? Because you always seem to like know how to say things to your kids and land with them. And I'm like, yeah, I get, you know, I just kept realizing, yeah, I do. And it's just that fire in me from that young age that God just put in me to say, we can do this different. You know, families can do this different. And we don't have to do it the way we were taught. You know, we don't have to do it in isolation from one another. We get to just like live life together, messiness and all, you know? So
I love that so much about your story. Obviously, I can relate to just with not talking about it. And I think so many of the audience on here at some point in their life have had somebody tell them not to talk about it, or, you know, that it's not a big deal, or it happens, or it happened to me. You know, those conversations that I'm sure you had as a child where maybe a parent or somebody was like, well, you know, it happened to me too. And so move on. And I love that, like you said you have the choice to do it differently. It's so huge because it is a choice to do it differently. And that's why you're like, I want you on here today, because you have the choice to like learn on how to start loving yourself, for one, and to just show up for your children in a different way than your parents showed up for you.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Yeah. So I want to go in. So I've been asking people kind of the last week on what they want to hear from you and questions that they have. So I have some questions here that I'm just going to go ahead and read, because really, like, this is about serving people on here right now. And I love that they ask so many amazing questions, and I have some of my own too, because to be honest, like I have a notepad right here and I'm taking notes too, because this, like, I don't have children yet, but this is like something that I am so passionate about, that it is going to be 100% different in my family. And it doesn't just stop with my family. And that's what I love about you too. It doesn't just stop with your children. You're going and spreading this with the world. So while I look at these questions, like, can you just share, I know usually I do this at the end, but like, I want you to share like how you do this for different families.
Oh, like my own personal platform?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I coach families privately. I coach families like individually, privately. Every family is so unique. God made every family with like different dynamics and personalities, and that's like part of what I love. And we're not all supposed to be the same. But so I coach families individually, privately, but then I also recently, I just started pocket coaching for parents. It's a monthly subscription. And it's like $12 a month, super simple and easy. And I send out weekly coaching. It's like to your text, you just get these little like 3 to 10 minute parent coaching from me every week. And so it's a great way to just like, you know, have something to shift into, or to be encouraged, or, you know, creative strategies with your kids, communication tools, things like that. So yeah.
That is an amazing tool to just, obviously I love the name, have it in your pocket, because like if you're on a day that you're just like, man, what do I do with these children? You're like, wait a second, I have a text message from Maya, which is so powerful. We're not,
you know how it came about? Can I tell you how it came about? Because I had friends and family that were like, you know, I just sometimes wish I like had you in my pocket, or like, you know, when I'm like disciplining my kids or trying to teach them, have a teachable moment, and like having these conversations. And every time you talk to your kids, it's like, how do you do that? Like, I just wish I could have you in my pocket to know like what to say and what, and I'm like, oh, so then God just gave me this idea. It's like pocket coaching for parents. Like, people want me in their pocket, I'll be in your pocket.
I told Maya this before, but I said, when I have kids, you're the first person I'm going to call every day, all day. So I'm like, I need more than just a pocket, but it's fine. I love it. So good. I wanted to make sure you guys have Maya's information, because she's on Facebook. Really, is that the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, and somewhere in the comments, I'll pop my link in here somewhere when we're done. Yeah.
Just want to make sure they know where to find you. But I want to get serious into these questions and just like to let our viewers know, like, these aren't easy conversations to have with your kids. Like, I think we can all agree, like, it's not easy to want to talk to your kids about abuse. Maybe if you've been through abuse, maybe it might be triggering something for you. But these conversations need to happen because it is so important. And I want you to talk about this. Like, why is it so important that a parent is talking to their kids? Like, I've heard before that, you know, oh, our schools talk about it. Oh, they go to assemblies and talk about it. But why is it so important that you as a parent talk to your kids about these topics of abuse? I want to focus on abuse right now, and then we're going to talk about
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, for me, I really believe that, like, you know, God's given each of us our children for us to, like, we are responsible for them. And whether you choose to, you know, let somebody else teach them whatever, you know, we're still responsible at the end of the day. So if you're not in that room where they're being taught, you really don't know everything that's being said, and you don't know if it's in alignment with what your family would say or think or believe, or how you would want your kids to approach the subject. And because it can be an uncomfortable subject, especially if it's happening with their peers, likely they're not going to want to come home and say, this is everything we talked about.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not there to see their facial expressions. You're not there to see those moments where they look confused. You know, you're not, and most likely they're not going to be asking those questions in class. And when you're around peers and anything's uncomfortable, it usually just becomes a joke. I mean, to be honest. And then it's like, well, everything around sex and whatnot is a joke now. And you know, not all the time, but you just don't know what other kids are going to ask or say. And then it totally paints their first picture. It's like there's this blank canvas, and their first impressions, all of our first impressions of things, they really do matter, you know? So if there's a foundation that you're wanting to lay with your kids, you really are the person to lay it, because one, nobody knows your kids like you. You know, nobody knows the look on their face when they're confused or feel embarrassed, you know, or are terrified of the conversation. I mean, you know, or they're like, wow, this is cool, you know, like, you just don't know unless you're the one having the conversation. And those moments are so important, you know.
That's amazing. And I used to be sarcastic. Anytime something became serious, I would just be sarcastic. And so, yeah, exactly. It was one of the coping mechanisms I had for anything sexual abuse, whatever it was. And so I can see how, as a parent, not having that foundation, and then I didn't have that foundation either. Like, I didn't even know what sexual abuse was, even like until after my abuse. And so, that is so important to be that person in your kid's life where they can come to and talk to. And I think you'd agree, it's an open book. Like, you have that conversation once, but that conversation's not over. Like, it's not going to just be like the one-time deal.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lifelong journey of kids. So awesome. So what age do you think really you should be talking to your kids about it?
I love this question. So Alicia sent me a bunch of the questions. I was like, these are really good questions. I love what everybody's asking. And that's actually something I tell my kids too. That's a really good question. Anytime your kids ask a question, that's a really good question, you know, just so it engages them. But honestly, any age and all ages. So because I had a history of my own personal abuse, it was like in my mind of like, how do I teach this differently to my kids? Like, before they were even born, like you, it's like you're already thinking, like, how am I going to have these conversations with my kids? And so I literally, when they were infants, and I have 4 kiddos, when they were infants, it would start with like, so anybody that has had infants knows, like, there's a stage where all of a sudden their hands can like reach their private parts, like the boy parts and the girl parts. And they're just babies, right? And they're just like, what's this new toy? And they just start feeling and whatever. And so I, from that age, would be like, not from a shameful place, not from a like, don't do that, like fear place. It was like, oh, like, that's your girl parts, that's your boy parts. And I'd be like, those are really special parts, you know, like God has a really good plan for those parts later in life. But they're not toys, so we're not going to play with them, you know, and I'd just like avert their hands of like, we want to, you know, be careful with those parts because they're special and they're not something to play with. And, you know, like we don't want anybody else playing. Like I would just say things and make it light, right? Like I wouldn't say that when they were an infant, do not let anybody else. But, you know, as they get older, it's like, so I start with creating like, this is a special area on your body. And the one thing that I always at any stage would do with my kids and that I still do is you normalize it as much as you can. So I'm not going to isolate just that area. So I would say the thing, you know, I'm changing their diaper or whatever and be like, that's a really special part. And like, it's not a toy, like it's not there to play with, you know? And then I'd be like, and we also don't want to put our fingers in our nose or our eyes or our ears, you know, or like any of the other holes in your body because you're going to get germ, you know, like I would just say whatever and make it like fun and light. And they're babies. So you're like, all I'm doing is having like a pleasant tone, happy words. We're learning to trust mom in these moments that otherwise could be awkward, right? And I'm speaking things that are true. And I'm getting it out so it's like comfortable for me because it can be awkward for parents too. So I literally am like, any age you can start talking about it and you just call it what it is. And at different stages, you call things different things as much as they're ready to know for their age. You know, and then for parents, like, because I know there's parents that haven't talked to their kids and they're like teenagers, right? I was never talked to about it. Like, until like, I don't know, maybe the week before my wedding or something. So like, and then I was like, yeah, I got it all down, mom. Like, but you know, it's like, and not to knock on any parents, it's like sometimes people just don't know they don't know how to approach these conversations, right? And so any age, like if you have a teenager, a great way to approach talking about it is, you know, or even like a grade school kid. When I have when I broach like hard conversations, hard topics with my kiddos, the first thing I do is I let them know like, hey, mom wants to talk to you about something, like let's have like some one-on-one time and make it like not like you're in trouble or like I want to talk to you about something, you know, and we have this time together and there's something I want to share with you. There's something I wanted to talk to you about because I realized like you're ready to know it. Like you're old enough now, or you're, you know, and then you jump into this conversation and give them some framework too. Like, why are you talking to them? Maybe you saw a show and you realize like, I've never talked to my kids about this. Tell them that. Be like, I was watching this show the other day and I realized we've never had this conversation. So I actually wanted to talk to you about sex, you know, or abuse. And then I would say to them, you know, have you ever heard that word before? And you just ask a lot of questions and you know, most kids actually have heard the words even if they don't know what they are. By ages, well, gosh, my kids are homeschool. So I know grade school kids hear these words a lot sooner. Like even kindergarten. I mean, it's like if you're in school, you could hear it from a fifth grader. You know, it's like there's no way to know. And so my homeschool kids were like, I want to say like 7 or something and they knew these words, you know, and it's like, so ask them first, like, I want to talk to you about this, whatever this is, you know, racism, abuse, sex, whatever. And then have you heard the word? Like, have you heard that word before? What do you know about it? You know, if they haven't heard the word, do you have any idea what it could mean? Like, do you think, you know, like just take some guesses. And sometimes they're like, I have no idea, you know, and then sometimes they're like, well, actually, I think I heard it in a show once, or, you know, something will usually come out and it just kind of gives you somewhere to start. And it also lets you know, like, what do my kids already know? Because a lot of times they know things that, you know, they don't even realize they know, they're just hearing it, you know, from all manner of places. So really any time is like a great time to start it. If they're older, I would definitely start the conversation by being like, okay, mom or dad wants to have this conversation with you. Just know it could be awkward. It could be uncomfortable. That's okay. It could
Really,
be
yeah,
our favorite conversation we've ever had, you know?
yeah,
I mean, there's all these, but if you know your kid and you kind of know, like, we've never really talked like this before, like, they're going to be awkward, just allow that to be possible, you know,
yeah,
and invite them to know, like, I've never had this conversation, you know, like most parents, like, you've never had the conversation either. So try to level the playing field as much as you can to be like, however we feel is okay.
yeah,
Whatever questions you have, they're welcome, you know,
yeah.
and just like normalize it. You know, I've never had this conversation. I told that to my daughter the first time we talked about sex. I was like, I've never had this conversation either before. It's kind of exciting, you know?
Yeah.
And quick testimony, like the first time I talked to my oldest child about sex, it was like the most beautiful conversation I've ever had, because we had so many leading conversations up to it that it was like at the end, she was like, this is such a beautiful gift God's given us. It's like such a blessing. And I'm like,
And how is she? Like, is she 11?
yeah, she's gonna be 12 next month.
Yeah, so she was at that age, like that's so amazing. Like just that's a testimony of like how well you explained it, because it is a gift and it is something that it is something that we should be realizing that it's not for everybody. And so I love that. When you told me that story before, I was like almost in tears, and like the 11-year-old can understand that it's a gift, and that just
totally. And she was 10 when we first talked about it, and my son's about to turn 10, and he's we're actually, we have a planned conversation for like next week.
Wow.
So yeah, one thing I will share too, that you know, if you, a great way to like engage the conversation is say you're like watching a show, or you know, the radio, or even just somebody in public, and they start talking about something having to do with like sex or abuse or being, you know, whatever. Just ask your kid, don't shy away from those moments, because the world, just like the world we live in, presents enough opportunities for us to engage our kids. And don't shy away from those moments, because really it's like God's like giving you that moment to be like, oh, you know, there's moments we've been at the gas station and I've heard a man like harassing a woman, you know, just like inappropriately, and I'm like, oh guys, did you hear that gentleman, you know, like, and they're like, yeah, like what did he mean, why did he say that? And I'm like, well, you know, sometimes I'm like, that's a conversation for the big kids, we can maybe have later. Littles, it's a little too heavy for you right now, so we're just gonna let that go. But we don't ignore it. Yeah, I'll tell him it's a little too heavy for you. Mom's gonna carry that for now, and at a later date when you're older, we'll talk about it. But it's a little too heavy. It's like if you were trying to lift a heavy table or something and you just couldn't, it was too much. Like, you just get to trust mom that that's like too heavy and too much for right now. And they're like, okay, we don't want to lift a heavy table, you know. It's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just look for those moments, and you don't have to like dive into a conversation right there, but say, hey, let's talk about this later. I would actually like to talk to you about this later, you know, and use those moments to engage them.
Okay, I love that. So you know, you talked about a lot about like the right way to do it. What would be necessarily like some words you don't want to say? Like, what are some like words that might put shame or guilt, or just like have a negative connotation about it, or you know, about abuse, about sex, about those topics? Like, you know, even if you elaborate on to sex trafficking and you know, missing children and stuff too.
Well, definitely, like when I was saying, when those moments come up around you in the world, don't ignore them, because your kids know. They can tell when you get awkward and you're ignoring something that you heard, or you're like, oh, I hope you didn't hear that. It's like, hear what? And they probably did hear it, but they don't maybe know what it is. And then the next time they hear it, they're like, now we want to know, you know, then it becomes this like secret, hidden, separate thing, right? Or like saying, oh, you know, we don't talk about that. Or like if you see something or hear something, like, we don't do that. We don't talk about that. You know, that's not for you. I will tell my kids, like, that's actually, I'll tell them that's a conversation for when you're older. Mommy's happy to talk to you about it. Say things like, I'm happy to talk to you about that later. But I would never say like, oh, that's too old for you. You're too, like, I would never just make it a harsh thing,
Yeah.
because then it becomes this harsh thing and they're not going to want to talk to you about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're going to be like, now you're telling me it's like good. And, you know, if you're like, if you're in the Christian community or church community, all it's like, well, now you're like, it's like you just isolate the whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
so many families will be like, don't talk, don't touch, don't do it, instead of like, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's know what it is. Let's know that, like, you know, God made it and it's good. It's like part of, it's like part of like it's part of a healthy relationship and marriage. Is like, that's what, it's a good thing, you know. And it's never, it's, you know, in, I mean, I believe like in a marriage relationship, it's like it's a blessing. It's not, I don't want my kids to be afraid of it. I want them to know to protect themselves though from, you know, the harmful, you know, just evil trauma of it in life. And there's ways to have those conversations too. But in terms of like educating your kids, never make it this like, it's this over here thing. It's this thing we never talk about, you know,
Yeah.
draw them in. And
Yeah.
even if it's just that little bit of like, that's a good question, you know, or, oh, I'm so glad you're asking mom about that. I'm so glad you're asking dad about that. I'm sorry that you had to hear that. Or, you know, if it's a negative, brought up in a negative way, but I'd love to talk to you about it. And if you're not ready, put a time frame on it. Like, let's maybe in 2 weeks, you know. You're like, I gotta think about how to like say this or pray about it, or, you know.
What are some conversations like specifically like about abuse like that you've had to have with your children? Have you had those conversations or like
Yeah.
Yeah, what are like, because I know you like having the sex talk is like one thing, but it's also like, is this like a negative thing? When can this be harmful? How can you speak up? How can you protect yourself? Those kind of conversations.
Yeah. Well, gosh, you know, abuse is something that most parents should be talking to their kids about before sex, but it's kind of tricky because you're like, you're not disclosing the what ifs, you know, because that is traumatic and scary for small children. So for littler kids, you know, it's, you can use words like boundaries. That's a word we use a lot, is like a boundary. Or you know, what's appropriate touch, what's not appropriate touch, what's like you know, family touch, what's non-family touch. Like, we give kisses in our family, but we don't give kisses on the lips to other people, you know. And so they know like some things are like in our family, like we cuddle on the couch, you know, and watch movies with blankets. Like, we actually don't do that with like friends or other people, you know. And so just really being able to establish with your kids, like, I I don't think parents actually do this enough, to be honest. I don't think that parents teach kids about that it's okay to have personal boundaries, even, you know. And it's so important, especially when kids are, I mean, I know we're all in quarantine right now, but when kids are going to school for like 7-8 hours a day and you've never talked to them about boundaries, you know, even boundaries with like how people talk to you. You know, they're going off to school and it's like they have all this time where they're learning from their peers, you know. And if mom and dad, if we haven't shared with them like, you know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate for touch, you know, or words, or even just like relationships, like, so I'll tell my kids, like, we never keep secrets. We just, like, that's something we've always done, is like, we don't keep secrets. Yeah. We don't whisper, we don't do secrets, and nobody should ever be keeping a secret. That's one of the first ways I talk to them, is like, hey, you know, what if they'd be like going with some other friends to the park or something, and I will do this with my kids, is like, before they go other places, even before we go in the grocery store, but before they go with another family or something, I'll say, let's go over our family boundaries, our family rules. What's our number one family rule? And all my kids will be like, have fun. I'm like, Yeah, number one family rule is have fun. Is it fun when you fight with your siblings? No. Is it fun when you're disrespectful to authority and get in trouble? No. Like, okay, so that's all under have fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, but then also it's like, you know, teach them things like we have a thing where we call it 2x2. We go 2x2. I have 4 kids, so I have that option, you know? And so whenever they're off with other people, it's like 2x2. Like, if you're in a group of friends, like, you got to be with 2 of your siblings, and we never go alone with somebody else, you know?
Yeah.
We don't play in rooms with closed doors. We don't play in rooms alone I just, those are boundaries that I've established. One, because in my years of counseling and stuff, I know statistics, and I know what, and I know what ages are too young, you know, to be alone together and that kind of thing. And little kids, you guys, like kids that are 5 and under, in my like expertise and professional opinion, it is not wise for them to be alone with friends, because they're just too little and they don't know, and they don't remember things. So they're not going to remember boundaries that you set. Yeah. They're not going to remember appropriate, non-appropriate. Yeah. They don't remember, like, you may think they know, but they don't know. Like, most of us don't have no memory from that time.
Absolutely. You know? And something I want to encourage you guys, like, just as she's going through these like boundaries, and some of you guys might be listening being like, wow, those are really strict boundaries. Like, no, my kids can play with whoever, whenever. But the honest truth is that wouldn't you rather be overprotected? It's not even being overprotective. That's the wrong word. Wouldn't you rather educate your kids than have to talk to them afterwards? And that's like why I'm having Maya on here, is because 2 of us on this phone call have wished that we would have had the conversation before it happened. So we would have voiced, so we would have been able to know what to do afterwards, so that we, you know, would potentially could have stopped it. And so something I want to encourage you guys, like, as Maya's going through this, is to realize, like, there is a way to do this without instilling fear into your children. Like, Maya's, I haven't met them personally, but like, she does lives all the time. Like, they're not fearful children that this is something bad's not at all, right? Not at all. No. And so, like, just to encourage you guys, like, this is like just things you can teach your kids to be safe, to not be in those situations. And they're not going to ever be like, oh man, my mom was so strict when I was 5 years old. Oh, my mom, you know, whatever it was, like, just know that, like, it is worth having these boundaries. It is worth having these conversations. But I just wanted to make sure, you know, like, it is, like, from speaking from experience, like, I wish I would have had this. I wish I would have had those boundaries. So
and just know, like, these are ideas, these are things that like I've chosen as a family for us, that I believe, you know, are wise, and there's, you know, good reason and statistics behind why I do what I do with my kids. And it's also not foolproof. You know, and as parents, it's like, that's the thing we have to be aware of too, is like, even with our boundaries, you know, anything can happen. And part of boundaries is like teaching your kids to use their voice. You know, it's not just do this, don't do that. These are our whatever, throw some light stuff in there, like number 1 rules, have fun, you know, and then we go over we don't go in the bathroom alone. We don't go, you know, and I'm like, awesome. I'm like, you guys are so smart. I love that, you know, praise them. Like, I hope you guys have the best time. Like, it's like, not, you know, balance it out, normalize it, but also have them. Whatever they are, have them. And teach them that if they're in a situation where, you know, the boundaries are being in question or whatever, that they can always call mom, or have somebody call their, you know, have another parent call, or use their voice and just say, my mom said, sorry, I want to respect and honor my mom. And, you know, and they've done that before. And it's so cool when the parents, like, and no parent has ever been like, okay, whatever, weird, you know, weirdo. I mean, it can be annoying, because you have to like rearrange your plans, and I've had to do that too, from friends that have different, you know, family structure ideas than me. But here's the thing, like, I respect it. Yeah. And other parents respect it, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that. So many parents, oh, I never thought of that. It's a great idea. We're going to start doing that, you know? Absolutely.
Awesome. Like, what you do is you explain why. Like, you're never like the, because I told you so. It's like,
Yeah.
I have you go like two by two because it's safer that way. Or I don't let you go to the bathroom by yourself because, you never know who's in there or whatever it is. Like, and just like to have that like open conversation, not just like because your mom said so, is the worst line. And I think we can all agree that that's the worst line. I'm sure we've all heard it millions of times.
Totally. And engage them in the conversation too. Like, do you understand why mom's saying this? Or why do you think mom's like establishing this boundary for our family?
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea? Do you like, I want to know, are they
Yeah.
resistant to it? Are they totally down with it? Like, you got to know where they're at too, and engage them, and then just get them on board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're not always going to like the things that we're establishing, no matter what it is, So.
Yeah. Any rule for me as a child, it was like any rule. I don't care what it was. I was like, you told me not to do it, I'm going to do it. So, there's always kids like that. But like, if I feel like if I would have understood why, because it was very much like because dad said so, because mom said so, kind of thing. If I would have understood, like, hey, actually, like they're looking out for me. Hey, like I can actually come to them and ask them why they're doing so.
And having a voice and having like a seat at the table with the dialogue, is so important, because then it's a family thing. It's not like mom's thing, dad's thing. It's like it really is like for us, it's our thing.
Yeah.
It's like how we roll, it's like that's how we roll. I tell my kids, I'm like, that's just how we roll.
I just like love your conversation. So Maya does lives, by the way, all the time with her children on them, and they have these conversations, a lot of these conversations like online. And so I encourage you guys to all check out Maya's page, follow her obviously, because the way she talks about it, it's like this gets to be a conversation, and it doesn't have to be a miserable conversation. It's really like why I love having Maya on here is like it gets to be an open conversation, it gets to be a continuous conversation, and her kids aren't fearful, like I said. So important. One thing I wanted to add on is that so I know you probably do this, but like so earlier I just want to clarify for the audience, like you said that like this is what our family can do this, but you can't do this with anyone else. And so like a lot of times abuse does happen in the family.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious like how you have those conversations, or I mean you kind of touched on it with the boundaries, like even like at 5 years old you don't have to. I absolutely love that. I love that boundary. In my family. And so what are some ways that you can kind of help children realize like that your abuser usually actually could be from a family member?
Yeah. So, actually, unfortunately, in our family, we've definitely had to have that conversation. And, they're not in relationship with their dad. My kiddos, the reason I'm a single mom is because their dad had a major sexual addiction and still is not a safe person for them to be around. And so we've had to have these conversations like within our home and like immediate home. And, even when I was kind of just like first finding out about this double life with their dad, I started having conversations with the kids and, reminding them. And I let my ex-husband know, listen, I'm going to start having these conversations with our kids, and I need our family boundaries to change until I like fully get what is going on with you and the extent of your history and and so I was just really open, and it's super uncomfortable to have these conversations, but if you don't have them, and like Alicia said earlier, is like the risk of not having these conversations is the risk of sometimes your kids being abused. And it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case, but it's also the risk of, a potential and them not use, like, even if there's no physical abuse, sometimes there's enough stuff leading up that's like traumatizing as well, and where kids, and even just little uncomfortable things with peers and things or cousins or, that you're just like, kids know what feels like a violation in your body. They know. And as many of you know who have been abused, it's like your body carries that. I mean, Alicia, that's like the whole premise of you coaching women. And I'm like, it stays in your body unless you like get that healing. you know, unless you really deal with the trauma that's there. And kids, they know that. And so not having these conversations, even if it's like about immediate family, like you really do, you know, you just risk your kids being in these situations that we would never wish upon our kids ever, you know. And so yeah, I've had to have these conversations, and it's like, you know, I will tell my kids, like, you know, there's certain areas in our body that we don't like expose openly, you know. And it's like, and we don't let anybody else go there, you know. It's like girl parts, boy parts, like anywhere that we would have clothing, we should have clothing. You know, like anywhere that we would walk outside of our house and have clothing on our bodies, like that should remain. And mommies and daddies, like sometimes we bathe and, you know, do things like this, but, you know, I had to say in our home, like, no mommy. And I just would throw myself in there too, so that it was like across the board normalized, like no mommy or daddy should ever be touching like your girl or boy parts unless like you have a tick, or, you know, like unless there's like a rash. And even still, or a doctor, right? Like if there's a doctor that needs to for whatever reason, but I'm like, even still, they should be asking permission. And I will tell my kids, like, you always need to ask mom.
Yeah.
Always need to make sure that, and not that somebody said, mommy said it's okay, but that you actually heard from my mouth.
Yeah.
That, you know, yes, this doctor may do his exam, you know. And of course, you're going to be present as a parent when that kind of stuff goes down. But for them to know, like, you know, unless mom said, and I that's what I've had to say personally, like, unless somebody has directly asked me and you've directly heard something from mommy, and even with like, you don't ever get in a car with somebody unless you've actually heard from mommy, not somebody telling you, oh, your mom said it's okay. You know? And so
the number one
just safeguarding, like that, because really, like, no parent needs to be up in their kid's business, like, unless there's a medical reason, you know. And so it's okay for your kids to know that. It's okay for them to know, like have ownership, you know, of their body. Like, this is my body, and I actually have a right to say, you know, what's comfortable, what's not, you know. And and so here's one thing I do with these conversations also. So I always try to normalize it. I know I've said that before, but try to bring in something else that's not so hard and heavy. Like, I'll say to them, I've said to them before, like, within this same conversation we're talking about. So for example, even if somebody's tickling you and it just feels like, you kind of get this feeling inside, like you're like, I'm not so comfortable with that, or you're wrestling, or whatever, like you have permission to tell anybody, mommy, daddy, cousins, siblings, if you're uncomfortable ever, it is your body, and you have permission to say, I'm not comfortable with that, you know, can you please not do that? And if they don't, I tell my kids, you have permission to use force. And you know, like, even with their siblings, I'm like, if somebody does, in our home, it's like, we respect the no. That's like a phrase I use, is respect the no. If somebody else tells you no, or if you're telling somebody no, everybody in the world knows that we get to respect each other's no's. And if we don't, we're overstepping. And so I tell my kids, like, we get to respect the no. And it may seem silly to you, like, you're tickling, what's the big deal? But if somebody else is uncomfortable, like, we love our siblings. We don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable. So let's just respect the no, you know?
In any sense, like, I think children aren't used to saying no to adults, aren't used to saying no to siblings, used to saying no in general. And so often it's like they're taught to respect elders. They're taught to, you know, family's family, all those kind of topics. And so it's like, you know, and for myself, I'm like, well, it's family. Like, when my abuser was a family member, I was like, well, family sticks up for each other. Should I really say something? You know, this can't be actually happening. And so knowing that, yes, like, having this conversation that does happen in the family, having this conversation, you can say no, even if it's an elder, like you said, even if it's a doctor, even if it's like whoever it is.
Oh yeah, anybody.
Say no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow, we could go on forever about this, and something I want to encourage you guys in is just like to reach out to Maya if you have any questions, because like she said in the beginning, like we're not meant to do life on our own. And I talk about this all the time. I talk to women who've already been abused. And so I'm on the other side of this. And so if you're listening right now and you have children, like I don't ever want to see your children. And that sounds harsh, but like I don't ever want to have your children in my program because I want them to know about it first. And yes, like you said, Maya, like there's things that happen in life and you never can be like, you can't, they're not going to live under a rock. But these conversations are so important to have because they will save your child's life. And can we like just like talk a little bit about like if something does happen to your children, like how do you have that conversation? And by the way, audience, like I just want you guys to know, like we did mention talking about racism, and I absolutely am passionate and want to talk about that too. But from like the time perspective, we took up all the time talking about. I kind of knew this would happen because this is such a huge topic. I don't know why I try to do them both together. I wanted since I had you here. So I'm gonna have Maya on again. Maya, is that okay with you? Like we're gonna have to have another conversation about.
And really, it's like, you know, take some of the same principles. Like when you're approaching any conversation, even if it's racism, ask your kids the questions. Have you heard this word? Do you know what it means? You know, get a framework of their understanding, and then kind of go from there. So I'll just say that really quick.
I love that. And I'm like sad that I know this conversation was meant to go where it is going right now.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a really important part of like, what if something does happen to your child? You know, it's not an easy topic, but what if something happens? Like, how should you handle it? How like, and I hope that like this hasn't happened in your family, but I know you know lots of people, and I know you know from experience like what's next.
Yeah. So I do have experience with this actually, unfortunately. And you know, the best way to navigate it again is to ask a lot of questions and be open. And don't I've done so much work with like with young women that have been abused and women that have been abused. So one big thing, because this is like a counseling moment. It's a moment that can be very defining for all of us. I'm sure anybody that's been abused remembers like the first time you kind of told somebody, or maybe not even the first time, but the first time you told somebody and it wasn't received well. I'll say that. So that can be just as traumatizing, because you already know, like you just know in your body and your mind and your heart and your spirit, there's been this violation. And then the moment you get the courage to speak it, right? Every single one of us just wants to be loved. Like in general, as humans, we want to feel secure. You know, we want to be accepted. We want to be heard. We want to be valued. And so think of those things, like if your child ever came to you, you're kind of suspecting something, you know, like something shifted, or there's, you know, awkwardness or whatever. We just, as parents, we know. And again, don't be afraid to step into that and say, hey, I've noticed, you know, X, Y, and Z lately. I just want to check in with you and, you know, see how you're doing. See if you've noticed that shift. See if, you know, do you know what shifted? Instead of being like, I noticed you're being this way. Why are you being this way? You know, like just open it up and ask questions that are not so much you directing it, but letting them direct the flow of the conversation. And then, you know, action steps, in terms of action steps after that, be an advocate for your kids. You will never regret it. Like literally call the police. Literally call the police, file a report, do whatever you need to do. And I don't say this from somebody that doesn't know. I say this from somebody that's had to do this, unfortunately. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful. And, you know, even to the point of like my child having to give testimony, like in a formal setting with, you know, people there that are listening and things like that. And I can tell you, I will never regret that, because it my child had a voice, you know, and my child was heard.
Absolutely.
And so many people along the way were affirming, and not just with words, but with like actually hard truth and evidence that like followed things, you know. And so it was like, and you know, the system is hard, I will say that. Be prayerful, you know, be considerate of your children and their ages. And you know, maybe it's not possible for something to be a right away thing that you step into, but if it's family, it needs to be spoken of immediately. If it's a stranger, it needs to be reported. If it's family, it I think it needs to be reported too. But I mean, I'm just such a big fan of like being in the light with it, with all of this kind of stuff. Like there is no reason for any of us to be, you know, holding on to these horrific things, like these horrific stories and traumas. And really like, and y'all, like I've done that, you know, like in my prior marriage, when I was sorting out like how bad is this sex addiction that my ex-husband had, and what do I do, and are my kids safe? And it's like I've been in that moment where I felt like, who do I disclose to and who do I not disclose to? And you know, is it my story to tell? I don't, you know. And you just have all these wrestling moments. But I can just tell you, from wrestling and holding back, and then from not wrestling and just being in the light with it all, being in the light and having just everything on the table is in the long run, it's always going to prove better for your children, because they're going to feel like somebody advocated for them, somebody fought for them, somebody heard them. And which one of us in the world does not want that? I mean, even not being abused, like just from a human standpoint, we all want to be heard. We all want to feel worthy. We all want to be known, even if it's the hard stuff. Yes. You know. And so whatever you can do to be an advocate for your children, to let them have a voice, you know. And there's no like, I mean, every situation is so different, you know, every situation, it's so unique, right? Because it's like, who was the perpetrator and who was abused, and it's like every dynamic is different and unique. It really, really is. But none of them are okay. And so just land there, like none of it is ever okay. And so don't ever try to make it okay for your children or anybody else involved. You know, it's easy to also, if it's family, want to say like, oh, it's okay, like, or make your kids be in relationship with them. What if they don't want to be and they are genuinely terrified? You're like re-traumatizing them every time. Absolutely. So just know that it's, you know, give your kids a voice in it and be their advocate. That would be just my biggest overall, if that comes up. Yeah.
Like that, like, oh, like I wish so bad that I had a mom like you. And my mom didn't know what to do. And I have forgiveness for her. But the conversation that we had afterwards was that it takes two. And that was almost as damaging as the abuse itself, because for years and years, I said that it takes two. It was my fault, and I felt guilty and shameful about it. And so my encouragement to you guys is that you have to talk to your kids about this. You have to ask if they're not acting. And you like she point out some signs, like, and to be honest, like sometimes like those signs are really hard to see. Like I was still on the volleyball team. I had lots of friends at school, but I was doing things like drinking at a young age. I was like cutting myself. And those were signs that were never picked up. And I want to encourage you guys like to have those conversations early and to continuously have those conversations. Check in on your kids, like you said, like, hey, I'm noticing. I love that. Have you noticed this? I feel like I believe that someone asked me that. No one asked me that. I would have been like, oh, well, yeah, you know, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to tell everything, because honestly, it's hard to talk about it, but maybe I would have been able to be like, something happened.
Yeah. So I love that. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of signs too. Like if kids are little and their speech reverts, you know, like if they're talking a lot and then all of a sudden they're talking like half the amount, eye contact, all of a sudden there's not good eye contact, you know, not wanting to cuddle, being sensitive to touch, like really being aware all of a sudden of all the parts that get stimulated, you know, like all those kind of things. Yeah, being really guarded. Also being really like just heightened, like it can heighten your senses. And so then it's like if you notice they're like sexually heightened and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? It's like they weren't like this last week. And, you know, also just recognizing that, you know, if you notice something shifting and your kids are older, like teenage and stuff, it could be that there's a memory that came up from when they were young. It could be not a current thing too. And all of a sudden they just remember, you know, I remember when that happened to me with my abuse. And it was like, all of a sudden I just had this flashback, like somebody pressed play on a video and it was like, brr, brr. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, like I was quiet. I would, you know, and I think I was 20 actually, but it still was like, I shifted. Yeah. My friends noticed, my family noticed. It was like, what happened, you know? And so just know it could just be a memory too. I just felt led to say that as well.
Absolutely, because I think a lot of what happens is like you put it down so far that you don't remember everything, and then something triggers it or something. And like as an adult and like as like I teach, like I think sometimes when you start remembering things, you're actually ready to start healing and working on it. So I think sometimes healing, and I think it's a really like huge blessing that you don't remember all the memories when you're so young, because it's like maybe you don't have the tools, maybe you don't have the support. But I like want to encourage listening, like if you start having those memories, like I think it's a sign you're ready to start healing. Yes, it's painful to go through those memories, but it's also a time of healing and freedom for you. And so like what I want to like just like leave with and let you like touch on this is that this is an ongoing conversation with your kids, and it's not something to be scared of. It's not something to be like fearful of. It's not something to avoid.
Yeah.
It's just to have these conversations because of like, what if, you know, not having like the fearful what if, but knowing that you have the choice to make it in your family, like you said in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And so like, if you can leave our audience with some like just encouragement and just like helping them feel like they can have this conversation. Like I know people might be listening to something like, oh, like they can talk about that, but I can't. So if you can just leave our audience with just one last note on just encourage them on talking about this.
Yeah, I think the thing I would say, two things, is that it's never too early and it's never too late, you know, and whether you're wanting to have these conversations with your kids, and I don't even like saying hard conversations, but the reality is that they are, you know, it's not like I'm like stoked the first time I have these conversations with my kids. I'm not like, yes, like let's go get, you know, actually we do like go get ice cream and talk about, you know, like we'll do something a little lighter when we have these conversations too, or something fun after. But I would just say like, just, it's never too early. It's never too late to talk about these things. You know, I've been in healing groups from sexual abuse with women that are like in their 60s.
Yeah.
And they never had anybody to talk to about it when they were being abused at age 3, 4, 5. And they've carried it their whole life. And so I literally like, it's never too early and it's never too late. Just be really mindful of who, you know, the ages and the stages that people are at. Yeah. You know, and just ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions, not for you to know, not for you to know information or because you're curious, but ask questions that are going to support the other person being able to tell their story. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's never too early and it's never too late. And gosh, there was something else. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. You've shared so many amazing tools, and I don't just like say that like lightly. Like I learned so much from this interview because sometimes it makes me nervous having kids, to be honest. And I know I've heard this from a lot of women who've gone through abuse, a lot of men who've gone through abuse. They're like, I don't want my kids to ever have to go through that. I'm not even gonna have kids. And so like this actually like, gives me hope because guys, like we're talking about this because it needs to be talked about, it needs to be normalized. And so like I have more hope for me raising a child. Like I'm excited to have a little girl and be like, hey, look, like it doesn't have to be this way. Yeah. And it's going to be amazing. So thank you, Maya, for being on here. And like Facebook, Maya Baker, and I'm going to tag everything and put it in the links below to make sure you're connected with Maya. But thank you so much for being on.
You're so welcome. Can you just give a little blurb about what you do? Because I also am posting this on my platforms, and I know there are many women. I love what you're doing. And you guys, Alicia has coached me also, and we've actually mutually coached each other in different things. And she's incredible. She's made such an impact in my life and my healing process as well. And I would love for you to share. So in case there's anybody like newly watching you, but also for my people that are going to watch this, I want them to know what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. Did not have that time. Yeah, I think it's so important because like I think what's amazing about this is that like, yes, Maya is amazing at teaching her children all these tools. But what's interesting about me and Maya working together is like that it is a continuous process of healing. And so when we connected on this, like I help women who've gone through abuse realize that they're not broken anymore and realize that they are ready to fight for themselves. And so how I do that is through my program, R3. It's a 6-month program, and you release your past. So you don't have to act like this never happened, but you do get to release it and know that it's actually made you stronger, not broken. And then you go to reclaim your life and figure out who you are again. Because so oftentimes after abuse, you just forget who you are. And you don't forget, but you just like push it down so far because you want to just, listen to what the world says about you and listen to what the trauma has done to you. But when you are able to reclaim your life, you're able to just start living again. It's just amazing. And then I help them rise up and hey, what's next? Because like I said, there's so much freedom and healing after abuse. And we're talking about kids here because I would love for these conversations to happen younger. But the reality is yes, this stuff does happen, but it's not the end of your life. It's not the end because you have so much more life to live. You are strong, passionate, and don't ever let anyone tell you that you are broken because it's simply not true. And so that's what I do in my program. It's a group program. You get to have awesome women like Maya's in the program and different people to have that community to realize you're not alone. Because yes, we're on this conversation because you're not alone. And that's what I get to do in my program. So thank you for letting me have the opportunity to share what I do.
Yeah. Alicia's helping me. The strength that I have obtained on the inside, she's supporting me getting it on the outside. So having a match, baby. There's healing. Yep. Amazing.
I love it. Thank you. So yes, you have a community now that you're a part of. You didn't realize that. Maya and I are here for you. If you ever want to continue these conversations of healing and how to talk to your children. So thank you, Maya.
You're so welcome.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye.